Spore is an intergalactic critique of mankind and its vices. Racism, classism, sexism, ageism, colonialism, every individual type of oppression mankind can experience is critiqued by Spore. Spore isn't just a game, it parallels European scholars' writings during the time of the Renaissance and shines a light back at society, showing that maybe we all are deep down evil, and that tug and pull between capital gain and labor has been a corrupting factor for all of history. Some theories around the world have pointed out how ever since mankind has introduced individual elements of capitalism into their system of life, capitalism has existed. It didn't start within mankind when the first big oil companies popped up. It didn't start when they started to use forms of currency in ancient Greece. Not even during the dawn of civilization in Mesopotamia. No, corruption's roots were there the second the first caveman killed a wild boar with his spear, an act that gave him a realization that that spear, that tool, was now his to keep. The object gained a sense of value to him as he realized that that weapon in his hands now had a shared history with him. And when his tribe asked him to please return the Oonga Boonga Death Spear, he flatly said, "No. This is my weapon, mine to keep." This may be what quote enlightened scholars have led you to believe, but Spore begs us to look even further back, before our tribal days, our animal days, and back to cellular growth, where, goddammit, fuck you Sklurble from the eastern realm of our cellular encampment, this microbiological nutrient clump belongs to me! Truly an enlightened bunch of developers. Here's our acceptance speech for Game of the Year 2008.
And the Game Award goes to Disco
Spore.
So, we'd like to thank all the great people that came before us, and Marx and Engels for providing us the political education. Thank you.
So now, anyways, if you couldn't tell, I've been completely and utterly lying to you. Spore isn't just a critique of mankind and its vices. It's also a silly game created by the same people who made The Sims. If you haven't been able to tell, my past few videos have gotten a little too theoretical, in which I'd make statements quite similar to the ones at the start of this video, but with these elusive thoughts bubbling in my head constantly, not letting me work properly for months, I just said, fuck it, I'm gonna talk about a special underground guilty pleasure of mine, Spore. I unironically really like Spore, despite it initially seeming like a simple alien creation game. The complexity and convoluted nature of it sort of infinitely ramps up until you're an intergalactic superpower, mercilessly taking control of everything at your fingertips. And the best part is that you can always trace back your lineage of creations to the very start when you were just a little amoeba in a pool of predators. I love Spore so much that whenever I get new PC hardware, like a new computer or keyboard, I always test them out by playing Spore. I love Spore so much that I own a physical copy of it for no reason. I even have a shitty Nintendo DS Spore Heroes Arena spin-off, which isn't a spin-off of the original PC game Spore, but it's a spin-off of the Wii Spore Heroes spin-off. That's right, it's a spin-off of a spin-off. I only have this Wii game because my roommate knows I'm so mentally fucked up. I get a sick sexual pleasure by having this game in the same room that I sleep in. Anyways, I love Spore so much that when my friend promised me his everlasting virginity for me to hop on 3v3 CP Process TF2, I decided that it was a better option to play Spore instead on my brand new 1080p monitor.
So are you playing Spore?
Shut up.
You're playing Spore?
Actually, I literally just swore that I would never have sex in my entire life, and you're playing Spore.
That's why I said let's go.
That's essential. I'm going to have sex right now.
Anyways, on with the review. Spore develops into a galactic civilization simulator by the end, something that we humans can only barely comprehend with our feeble minds, so we're truly grateful that the developers at EA have been able to comprehend it for us. But let's start off with the start of Spore, something we humans can comprehend a lot easier. Cellular life. At the beginning of the game, you and your Spore creation are blasted into a cellular habitat. While this creature is all yours to name, control, and even adapt with new limbs and tools, your utmost goal at this point is to simply eat and collect food like a fat British woman at her favorite chippy shop. This is the first stage of the game, cell life. While this may seem like a cheap copy of Agar.io, note that Agar.io actually came out long after Spore. Now, I hear you asking, was Agar.io inspired by Spore? From my research, probably not. My source, I Control F the term Spore in Agar.io's wiki, and nothing came up, so they're probably good. I don't know how I can critique and review this part of the game that much, other than it's really cool how when you grow, the surroundings around you seem to shift along with you. I always loved how a huge enemy would chase you around and would suddenly become your prey, and of course I would always chase after them out of spite. They were the ones that bullied me when I'm a 5'4" manlet, and so when I pop my rhino pill, I deserve just retribution. That's possibly the worst thing I've written. The visuals of this game are extremely stylized, which has led to this game aging quite well, and it still does look pretty good. I'll be honest, so eventually after your first playthrough, they give you the option to skip to whatever later stage of the game you want. While I absolutely hate some later parts of the game, because of how good the cell stage is, I almost never do that. If the rest of the game is a roller coaster, the cell stage is a moderate 30-minute wait before the ride. But it's not a normal wait, it's a wait where the kid in front of you keeps tugging at his mom's jacket that he doesn't want to go on the ride, but she just ignores him. And so when the ride starts, he's in constant fear that his restraint will fail, leading to his death. In the cell stage, you choose a bunch of important traits: what color your creation is, what abilities and attachments you want to give them, and at any time you want later in the game, you can go into the editor and completely change your Spore creation that you have cooking up. While you can manage your creation with small changes every now and then, you can also completely erase what you previously had and create something entirely new. Now, I understand that you intellectual roller coaster tycoon fans will carefully build the perfect Spore being so that by endgame you have a beautiful diagram of your creation from start to finish. I was like you too once. I spent dozens of hours structuring and manipulating the perfect Planet Coaster world, and yes, I'm very proud of it. But it's time to realize that in Spore, there's no consequences, only immediate positive pleasures or negative displeasures. And it's time to realize that on my PS5, I never had enough storage to build my ideal Planet Coaster world to begin with. I was doomed from the start. So in actuality, nothing matters. Make whatever the fuck you want, and by the end, honestly, the game will always be fine with it. But there still are some pretty fucked up creations you can make, like you can make your character blind, which leads to some pretty interesting challenge runs. Your heart's the limit, and trust me, some people have some really fucked up limits. Anyways, the cell stage is really neat, so I'll let 7 to 8-year-old me explain his thoughts on Agario to finish up here because he has better thoughts than me anyways.
Dang it! Diggity dang, that just happened. He dies! Getting bigger. Dang it! See you guys later.
Wow, what a little goober. Well, just like my younger self, I eventually had to evolve, gain new thoughts, and more importantly, subject myself to the third dimension. You see, once you've eaten enough and gained enough brain power, you evolve to the next part of the game, the creature stage. Creature stage is actually pretty fun. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I didn't really enjoy this part of the game at first, but after playing some later, much shittier parts of the game, I've come to realize that it's actually quite alright, and in my opinion, it's probably the apex of quite a few elements of the game. In particular, this stage is really good with the character creation editor. There's nothing too special about this stage, as it's really just the last stage, but a little bit more complex and 3D animal-like, but really, I wouldn't ask for anything more. Now though, it's important to talk a bit about philosophy. You see, I've been hiding a little bit of complexity from you. Throughout each of the main phases of the game, you essentially choose between being a pacifist, a violence-filled murderer, and something in between. Here's a little graph I made that shows the names for each one of these philosophical archetypes for each stage. Now, something important to note about this graph is that as you play, you can essentially mix and match whatever you want to do in each phase of the game. On one playthrough, you can be a herbivore in cell stage, a predator in creature stage, industrious in the tribe stage, and then religious in civilization stage. Different combinations will lead to a different archetype in the final stage, but for now, just know that to get enough XP to move on to the next stage, there's basically 3 things you can do: be nice, be mean, or something in between. In the previously mentioned cell stage, that means eating plants, eating other animals, or a little bit of both. Here in animal stage, it means dancing, fighting, or dancing and fighting. As an animal in creature stage, in order to gain enough XP to move on to the next stage, you either need to socialize with other creatures, which means you have to dance or sing to other species to sort of assimilate them into being your friend, or you can just completely wipe out other species by killing them. Either way, as an animal, you're no longer growing based on a lustful consumption. Sure, eating food is helpful to let you regain health, but otherwise now, social interactions are the core of the gameplay. Now, my first time playing through this game on a nice pacifist run, I thought animal stage was the absolute worst. You'd end up going to a nest, initializing a socialization ritual, and if they dance, you dance. If they sing, you sing. I have to admit, this gameplay loop is more than a little boring. As you play, you'll find more parts to upgrade how good you are at dancing, singing, whatever, and then you go out and socialize again and again and again. The worst part is, as time goes on and the stage gets more difficult, that means it takes more and more time to socialize with other species. It's a mindless task, but times 1,000, and if you play through the animal stage like this, you're likely gonna get bored very fast. Okay, but now hear me out. The only way I was able to make being a pacifist fun was by socializing with really high-level creatures, who then I could use to do my bidding. This means the most fun way to be a pacifist in Spore is to fuck with the system and unintentionally become the owner of a vicious predator. If you have a companion character creature murder tons of animals like I did though, your alignment does actually change, so you do have to be a little bit careful with what you do if you want to be a pacifist but still kill other creatures. Because of how monotonous being a social pacifist is, I basically only play this stage as a carnivore, which means in order to get the correct archetype I'm always aiming at in the final stage, I will essentially search the Wikipedia to see how long I can do that while still being this grotesque carnivorous monster and animal stage. For instance, as you can see here on the Wikipedia for Spore archetypes, the archetype earned for being a complete pacifist through your playthrough is Shaman. Luckily, as long as you remain a pacifist in every single other stage, you can get away with being a vicious predator in animal stage and still get the archetype of Shaman. Wow, how unrealistic, I hear many of you saying. Well, not really. If anything, this only makes Spore more realistic. You see, similar to real-life history, often covering up the destructive ways of one's past is the quickest way to lead to a prosperous future. This is why, if you ask a NASA scientist who's responsible for the moon landing, the response will be in German. Anyways, evolving, getting more friends, and fucking up more and more shit in this stage is actually really fun. The previous Cell stage had almost no parts to use, but in Animal stage, in my opinion, it has the best creation editor of the entire game. If you buy the cute and creepy DLC pack, you can have even more things to make your creations with, but to be honest, the base game already gives you a lot of tools to make whatever you want. You can make some really fucked up shit. For instance, my friend forced me to recreate his favorite character from his favorite movie. No, not Boba Fett, the fantastic Rasputia from the hit 2007 movie Norbit. By the way, the director of that movie went on to do amazing things. For instance, right now, he's the CEO of Paramount Pictures. Okay, so I'll admit my preferred playstyle through this stage, the sort of aggressive path, isn't that much more complex than the pacifist route. Of course, combat is way more entertaining than the social systems that I described earlier, but that's mostly because designing your creature to be a predator is a lot more interactive than, just getting a stat that makes him dance better. For instance, giving your creature's wings to be able to fly, move fast, or, higher attack damage does actually make the combat feel somewhat different in each playthrough. And while, once again, the combat isn't the most complex system, I mean, I'm basically just pressing the same button over and over again and swarming enemies with my group of Spore creatures. The smallest hint of tactics and strategy, along with the satisfying feeling of eradicating an entire race, it stimulates my brain the same way as, like scrolling through Instagram Reels and watching kids fall down escalators. And that's one of the highest achievements I can bestow upon a game in the modern era. Okay, so while killing and socializing seems pretty menial at first, you'll eventually learn a few tricks. For instance, something the game kind of forces you to do is, how do I put this nicely? Become a typical Minecraft YouTuber. You see, as I mentioned, not only is it harder to kill higher level creatures, but it's harder to socialize with them as well. Trying to socialize with a creature much higher level than you is like going to a retirement home and trying to convince them of the current price of a Big Mac. They just won't fucking accept it. But you see, this means that the more weaker, supple, and lower level creatures are easier to manipulate. So, because of the mechanics of the game, I'm basically encouraged to prey on little kids. When I try to either kill a tribe or influence them with my social abilities, going for the weaklings is the easiest way to break through their first line of defenses, hence the correlation to your average professional Minecrafter. Except instead of crafting an SMP Minecraft world and an all-age inclusive Discord server to lure in the young, I'm crafting an absolute abomination in the Spore editor. Anyways, moving away from the manipulation of the youth, while Animal Stage may not be everybody's cup of tea and it feels like the game is very quick to move on from it, this is where a majority of the physical changes to your Spore creature will likely be made. As in later stages, you'll be crafting and designing things a lot more complex than your base creature. As an animal, getting new parts and adding them to heighten your physical or social prowess, influencing the world around you, making friends, and of course, mating with a fellow beautiful specimen is really fun. And so, for many, I think that this stage might be the apex of the game, and I fall victim into that category very often. I love crafting new species, but having the urge to continue into later parts of the game is often very hard. Exploring the world as a fresh animal will be an experience I won't forget, so thank you so much to the Spore developers. Thank you so much for this wonderful experience. This may be one of the longest stages of the game, but if anything, I would say that this phase ends a bit too soon. If someone possibly could make a full game similar to this singular stage, I think that alone would probably be really good, because once I really begin to start enjoying it, as my creature and its friends begin to fuck up high-level enemies, you're then promptly pushed into the next phase of the game. Tribe stage. Fuck. Tribe stage is remember that roller coaster analogy I used earlier? This is if that little boy's premonition came true. His harness actually did disengage, leading to him falling to his death. You see, this is sort of the awkward, acne-written, 2016 feminist wrecked, Under Armour shoes phase of things. Yeah, so a lot like middle school. But no, this isn't cool later middle school where you go to the store and, buy a bottle of Fanta and a box of Hot Pockets. No, it's the earlier part where you walk home in your gym clothes. Still think Rick and Morty is a groundbreaking feat of cinema, and have that one weird doctor visit where they and then if it isn't obvious, I fucking hate Tribal Stage. Tribe Stage basically turns Spore into an RTS game where you're controlling a small tribe. Similar to the previous Animal Stage, you have the ability to either socialize with other tribes or fight them, but now you aren't just trying to keep alive a singular creature, but a whole conglomerate of them. In the last stage, sure, you can get an army of creatures to fight your battles with, but at the end of the day, the survival of your main Spore creature was the only thing that mattered. But you see now, because you're in charge of a lot of them, the gameplay gets a bit tricky, and by tricky, I mean just a lot more annoying. Okay, so if you haven't been able to tell already, every stage in Spore kind of feels like a half-baked version of another game, and where most of the other stages take that and run with it to give you a short but very direct fun version of whatever experience you're trying to emulate, Tribe Stage adds a slight amount of complexity, but really nothing else that makes it actually rewarding to play. For instance, Cell Stage is like a browser flash game, and a later stage is similar to real-time world strategy games, yet both make enough concessions but contributions to make that stage feel like a diet version of whatever game they're copying, but still with a fun gameplay loop and structure. Tribe Stage takes a sort of StarCraftian RTS experience, but really botches it to hell. In order to grow your tribe, get more weapons, instruments, and of course babies, you need food. Although there's a few ways to get food, the main two are collecting fruit from surrounding wildlife or hunting for it, and I mean hunting a lot. If you're doing an aggressive playstyle in which your creature has never developed the right organs to eat plants, you're pretty much fucked. You see, in order to fight a village, you need to first fight animals to get resources, and then using those resources, you can then fight another village and conquer it. But then, after that fight, you will need to rebuild your lost tribe members, which means, guess what, you need to fight more animals. Don't get me wrong, fighting other tribes is actually pretty fun, especially if you're really overpowered, which you will be basically every single time, because honestly, this game is for children. But still, this stage sucks because of just how monotonous the resource-focused gameplay diverts you from the actual fun. A good way to describe how it feels to be forced to kill animals for food in this phase is like being forced to kill your neighbor's dog that's immortal. Sure, the first time it's going to be very scary and stressful, but once you see it get back up after a shotgun blast to the face, only to bark and smile back at you, you lose all sense of attachment. It becomes a mindless task for you to complete. You see, once you eradicate animals in this stage, after a bit of time, they just fucking come back. They respawn out of thin air for you to kill them all over again for more resources. And then of course the other way to gain resources is by gathering fruit. Although I find this not as monotonous as hunting, it's still pretty boring, as once again you must harvest plants over and over and over again for the duration of this phase. While harvesting plants still takes less brain power than fighting animals, it's still pretty annoying and turns Tribal Stage, no matter what way you cut it, into the worst part of Spore. The only slight retribution in this stage is you can mix up your creature's looks. For instance, I turned mine into Wall Street bankers in the editor. Like always, the editor is really fun, except again, it's just not as deep and complex as all of the other editors in the game. Anyways, other than the resource management, the act of befriending or destroying other tribes it's not that bad. It's very similar to Animal Stage because you either impress the other tribes or destroy them. Also, similar to Animal Stage, the combat, in my opinion, will always be a lot more fun than socializing with other animals. While I did my best to strategize when I went to war, the battles were usually more of just a check to see who can do the most damage. While there can be a strategy to keeping a certain amount of troops at home and then a certain amount in battle, taking every available troop you have into battle is honestly enough to win every single fight you have. In Animal Stage, there's constantly other animals that would just be so much higher level than you that honestly you could have a really hard time trying to kill things. But in Tribe Stage, every other tribe is relatively easy to take over, so there isn't even that huge skill gap between you and a much more powerful being unless you're on hard mode or something. Socializing also feels like a high school beauty pageant. Do they like you? Do they not? It's all based on if you have the right instrument and is really fucking stupid. I try to never do this if I'm in this stage, like I don't even think I have the footage for this. Luckily, Luckily, in the Spore community, everybody seems to hate Tribal Stage along with me. When I asked my friends to rank the stages of Spore, everyone seemingly agreed that Tribe is the bottom of the barrel. It isn't as innovative as future stages, the editor isn't as good, the way you interact with the planet isn't as interesting, combat and socialization aren't as fun, the unique nuances and small little strategies every other stage has is somewhat unimportant and boring. And the worst part of this stage is its limitations. You can't turn into a totalitarian dictator, and you can't turn into a Minecraft-loving pedophile. But luckily, once every other tribe is either captured or befriended, your brain grows even more, and you move into one of the best stages of the game. Civilization Stage! Sorry, just making sure everybody watching is awake right now. So, Civilization Stage, like its namesake, is very similar to Sid Meier's Civilization, a game that I actually don't really like that much. Don't get me wrong, the game is really cool, but turn-based games, in nature, actively disable every single dopamine receptor in my brain. Play Pokemon or Persona, they said. I'm sorry, I don't like getting invested in the psychodramatic youth role-playing of a Japanese man. That being said, Civilization Stage isn't turn-based, it's real-time, which means like every other real-time strategy game that I love, I can actively send every single one of my vehicles to destroy the enemy, and they don't have the benefit of a turn to be able to see it coming. But conversely, that means that you never get a proper turn to react to them either. Being a children's game though, this difficulty is almost impossible in Spore, because at its worst you'll just lose a town and then reclaim it minutes later. Anyways, the goal of this stage, as you can likely guess, is very similar to every other stage so far: capture or envelop all other civilizations on the world. Yet now, the stakes involve the entire planet and its natural resources. First though, you have to build a city, or should I say, build a Frostpunk city. It's quite interesting, as I've mentioned before, how easily you can sort of tie Spore into modern day video games as a whole. This is one of the most interesting examples, as building a circular city with the correct architecture to maintain the happiness and well-being of the inhabitants is, it's literally the exact same as Frostpunk. But unlike Frostpunk, where the civilizations can actually revolt and fuck you up if you do bad things, in Spore, no one comes between me and my militarized industrial district. Workers' rights? You're an alien, Glip-Glorp. On my planet, saying the phrase workers' rights is illegal. A city in Civilization Stage has a city hall, houses, entertainment, factories, cars, boats, and planes. Each one of these is fully and completely customizable in their own unique editors. You can spend hours configuring the perfect aesthetically pleasing build, or just a terrible jumbled together mess. Like all editors, this is what really brings out the personality of every run of the game, as sometimes I want to make something unique, and others, I'll just make myself a box or something. Also, something not really talked about in this Spore stage is the music editor. Here you customize a song that's going to be played at all of your captured cities, and it's definitely one of the most underappreciated parts of Spore. Making songs is really cool. Take a listen to my sick beat. Additionally, like every other stage so far, each city has a methodology. Of course, there's militaristic, but the others are religious, representing the peaceful option, and economic, representing something a little in between, like an omnivore. Just like in real life, the military takes things over by force, and religion, despite not being talked about enough, is a weird undercurrent that you can trace between wars throughout time. And finally, there's the economic route through this stage, which honestly is probably the most interesting way to play this stage. You see, the other two are mostly just attack-style playthroughs, but in economic, you have to set up trade routes and relationships to buy your way into owning the planet. But I honestly play Spore for fun and not to play virtual Shark Tank with enemies, so for the most part, I actually don't really like this playstyle. If you set up a world where every city is under the same methodology, every city will have the same buildings and vehicles that you've already created. If you suddenly decide to create a city that has a different methodology though, you get the chance to create entirely new buildings and vehicles. But as you already know, I really just like to combine everybody into my one unified ideology. Crafting cities increases production, and alongside with cities, you have to capture spice deposits. Wow, a space game using spice as a resource? It's done! So the main gameplay of Civ Stage is, you get an army, take over cities, assimilate them into your singular empire, and then do it all over again. While this may not seem very different from other stages, it's hard to explain, but it's just different. This time, building an army taking control of land feels a lot better than how it did in previous stages. Slowly building resources is a very good difficulty ramp, as instead of other parts of the game where you'd sort of just infinitely do something that never felt too different from start to finish, during Civ stage, the starting battles and the ending battles become much more of a slow fight to a landslide victory, to the point where your final opponent can literally surrender, making the entire world yours. Combat is mostly simple as clicking a city and waiting for it to be captured. Early game, you'll get some land vehicles in attack, but eventually you'll start to get ships and planes. Now, because this is Spore, there's as usual only one way to do things that's infinitely easier than every other, so let me fill you in on the meta of Civilization stage. Play as usual, capturing cities, building up resources until you get an army of planes, boats, and cars. Take over cities, of course, by pressing select all on your army, making them all go to a single town and wait for it to be captured. Then once you capture a city, do whatever resource grind you need to do to get back to full capacity, and then once you're ready, do it all over again. Now, something you'll notice is that some civilizations are landlocked. You may think that you have to do a slow trickle of taking away their resources and battling around them, but no. The trick is to send all of your boats and planes to capture it. So preferably the first thing that you're going to be taking over will be near an ocean. And then once captured, you should first sell all of your land vehicles that are landlocked on your previous continent, and then buy a whole fleet of others on the new continent. And boom, that's modern military tactics. You've beaten Civ stage. Very, 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 very easy, I know. Sadly, this is one of my favorite stages, but I don't know how much more I can actually say about it, so I guess I'll just give you some of the horrors I found in the wars that took place on my Spore planet. Depending on who you ask, Space Stage is either the most unnecessary part of Spore or the only part of Spore. You see, some people who play Spore will get to Space Stage and then stop, but others will only play Space Stage, to the point where they're sort of two categories of the same game that feel very distinct from one another. Space Stage is sort of endless, like, you know, space. And because of that, to beat Space Stage, you have to sort of find your own goal for the most part. For some, beating Space Stage means defeating the infamous Grok's army, the bad guys that control thousands of planets in the center of the universe. And for others like me, well, we have a simple domination approach. I don't really need to flex on the whole universe, but I do need to buy, kill, and reason with everything around my home planet. That alone will take an average player a few hours, so let's just talk about what there is to do in Space Stage to begin with. First, as you've likely been able to tell by my description of the game so far, I love to do a single methodology or approach, and only do that. I like to be a big bad guy or just a really good guy. For many games, playing in between as a sort of anti-hero can be interesting, but you do need to remember, this isn't a fully fledged RPG where everybody has their own distinct personality and character traits. It's Spore. So for me, figuring out who to kill, who to spare in early game is pretty much just a random choice. Like, what? Do I want to kill this guy? Do I want to save this guy? It really doesn't matter to me. So for me personally, choosing to be either just good or bad from the start, and doing that throughout my entire playthrough, honestly makes more sense. But that all ends in Space Stage because, once again, space is infinite. It's fun to both trade your way to victory or kill everybody and have a huge area solely dedicated to your own nation and its brilliance. And unlike every other stage where every single individual aspect of that is really fun, in Space Stage, playing is only really fun if you sort of combine them in your playthrough. Now again, this may be a kind of controversial Spore opinion, so definitely say your piece in the comments below if I'm just being stupid, but it's really cool to, for some civilizations, save them and trade with them, and then for others, utterly destroy them. I assume the devs really wanted players to go down this path given the way that the badges and achievements work, and also because of how this game and its economy works. Let me explain. Spice. It's stone! Spice! Stone! Okay, so you really have to first understand spice. Before, you were a simple spice dealer, you know, skimming some off the top, making ends meet, but in terms of galactic trade, that's barely enough to run an entire empire. To understand how to correctly deal spice, you gotta understand some tricks, like the basic table of spice prices. I highly recommend the Spore wiki Wiki for help on this entire complex stage of Spore, but what you really need to know is purple spice and pink spice, that's all that really fucking matters. If you want to be a dealer, a top-end supplier, you need that nice purple stuff. So how do you do that? Well, good question. In Space Stage, you get individual colonies, which are essentially entire planets from Civilization Stage. You can enter any planet your ship can currently reach, and within that planet do a multitude of things. If a planet isn't owned by anybody currently, you're in luck. It's entirely yours for the taking. If the planet is somebody else's, sure, you can buy it from them, but that takes precious resources and long-time trading relationships. At the end of the day, completely destroying a planet and stealing it to make more money with bases that are already set up is a lot easier. So although I do suggest trading with planets while you can, I also suggest choosing a few that you're fine completely blowing up and keeping to yourself. Yes, you are a space drug cartel terrorist. That's the whole point of Spore. Okay, so while red, yellow, blue, and green planets can be sort of useful early on, getting a solid pink or purple spice outpost, farming loads of it, and selling it allows you to steamroll a lot of the content in this stage. And honestly, there really isn't much else to do other than getting very, very rich. And then using that money to flex your power to other nations by being able to destroy an entire colony in what, like 2 hits? But okay, how do we get powerful enough to do this? And how do we sell our product? Now, that's the great part. Okay, so early into your campaign, I recommend you doing a few simple quests for a few planets. It'll get you money to spend on weapons and equipment, and it'll also allow you to socialize with other people. Socializing for what reason? You're doing this to see the sell rates of the other aliens. Early on, you want to hold at least one of each spice color in your inventory and use it to test the waters at every planet you visit. As you can see on the graph, some planets will give you a lot more money for spice than others, so you have to really keep track of that. For instance, a solid planet that buys blue spice for 17,000 should be remembered, and you should definitely go back there multiple times so you can build up early game funds. But let's say you've been playing, doing quests, and getting money for a while, and you finally find the perfect planets for your colony. Now, it's time to terraform. You see, to get the perfect condition for our drug operation, we first have to change the temperature and atmosphere levels to meet our specifications. The more that a temperature or atmosphere meet the perfect quality for our drugs, the more colonies and thus the more spice we can be able to grow. And also, make sure to have equipment like increased spice storage on your most profitable planets to really rake in the dough. Oh, are your Spore slaves not working fast enough for you? Well, easy. Spore has a little exploit that's probably the easiest duplication glitch out of any game I've ever played. First, from your inventory, put a load of spice onto the planet's surface. Then, beam it up to you, and while it's in the air, buy it back from your planet's ambassador. Your storage will be filled with the spice, but at the same time, the one that you beamed is still in existence in the air, thus duplicating it. Do this again until you have a maximum stack. Go to your cash cow planet to sell it at an inflated price, and then do this over and over again until this stage literally becomes a piece of cake. That's not fun, I hear you saying. You're cheating. Okay. Just don't fucking do it then. I've played so many of these shit games and I suck at them. I suck so bad, and for once I can dominate in a real-time strategy game. Is that too much to ask for? My aliens are happy, the economy is fresh, and I have weapons big enough to destroy an entire planet within a minute of them simply making a frowny face at me. I am the god. I am the destroyer of Spore worlds. I am Hyzen Spore, the leader of the Spore Purple Spice Cartel. I am Dashman, and I own everything! Well, I don't own quite everything because there still is the Grox to deal with. You see, once you've discovered enough, you're sort of going to want to go off on your own and see what else is in this world. And then you'll come across something that a lot of aliens have sort of warned you about. The Grox. The Grox are unironically some of the most intimidating things in any video game because for a game made for children, they have this oh shit moment where you realize what you've been doing, taking over and destroying planets. The Grox have been doing that for like hundreds of thousands of years. You can reach the center of the universe, which is my personal favorite way to say that I'm done with the space stage, but the Grox is that final challenge that the developers clearly left in for those truly patient enough. And if this review has gotten one thing across, it's that I'm anything but patient. I haven't killed a Grox at all. So that's Space Stage for the most part. Yes, there is a lot more to Space Stage, like there's a lot of really interesting quests you can do, and also there's that whole Galactic Adventures side mode in which you can make your own missions, and it's like, again, almost an entirely different game. But for the most part, we've now traveled from the start of Spore to the very end. If you think this video was a mess, That's because it definitely fucking is, because Spore in general is a mess. A lot of the stages honestly don't hold up. It's hard for me to replay a lot of them over and over again after, you know, just a handful of playthroughs. That being said, it's sadly still one of my most played games on Steam somehow. And as much as I can criticize it, Spore has a lot of charm and has a lot of worth playing even today in 2024. Whenever I would play this game and, for instance, I'd show it to friends and open up things like the character creation editor, the amount of just bullshit you can make in that thing is absolutely insane. It's possibly one of the best character creation things in any video game ever. They thought about so much. You'll think that there's a little gimmick or trick you can do that they didn't think of that would make your Spore creature absolutely terrible, but boom, when you take off all the arms and you want to make an inchworm, he moves like an inchworm. They thought of that. And truly, that's because Spore is a lot deeper than you'd think. A lot of the mechanics, for instance, in Space Stage are a lot more interesting, and people are still talking about the best way to play. People are still doing challenge runs. The Spore community is oddly still really active, as similar to other games made by this company, like let's say The Sims, the people that play these games make it for the sense of creativity that this game gives you. And that's the thing, I've shown my Spore creations to all of my friends, and my few friends that have played this game too have shown me their Spore creations, and every time it's like, oh my gosh, this is actually an entirely different world with entirely different creatures that feels entirely different than from what I was doing. And that's why Spore, albeit a silly goofy game that I'm probably not going to play too much after making this review, is still possibly one of the most interesting games ever made in terms of that creativity sandbox perspective. People need to talk about Spore more, and I like this game a lot, and I've been ranting off script for a while and think I should stop. So that's the end of the video. Shorter content to come, hopefully. Goodbye. Ring, ring, ring. Ring, ring, ring. Ring, ring, ring. Telephone.